He survived impossible odds because the princess believed in him. He lived in the gray underbelly of the fleet, where maintenance pipes met living quarters and the air tasted faintly of oil and reheated food. He had been born into this world of metal and routine, had learned to read wiring diagrams before he could swim, and knew the names of engines as if they were family members. He liked the machines. They were honest. On the day they announced the selection for the reconnaissance mission, the hangar bay smelled tighter than usual: fuel, hot metal, and the nervous perfume of people who did not sleep. A hull-sized hollow pulsed above the assembly floor, showing the silhouette of an alien ship the Admiralty had taken from distant transmissions. It was wrong in all the ways human ships were not. No predictable joints, a surface like a living shard. The Vryloks were not like anything humans had fought before. They were fast, implacable, and their weapons could sing a world into dust. Kale stood with a crate for a seat and watched the list scroll. Names of officers, veterans, and specialists lit the air. He had seen lists before. They were where fate pointed. He had expected to remain invisible, a necessary condition, he believed, for surviving long enough to fix what others broke. He kept his head down, hands chalk-stained from an overnight repair, and hoped no one would ask his name. When the small, silver transport descended, the crowd parted. She stepped out like someone who belonged to a different rhythm, Princess Serenia. She wore no armor that glinted like trophies. Instead, she had a simple uniform and an expression that made the room quieter. People called out and bowed, but her attention moved past the noise, as if she had a map only she could read. The selection came from the Admiralty records, from simulations and cold calculations. Kale did not fit any of the boxes they used. He was an engineer, assigned to diagnostic arrays and pipeline inspections. He was not trained for covert infiltration or frontline combat. He had never commanded men, and he had never been in a position that required bold decisions while under fire. Still, when the list blinked and his name appeared among the chosen, the world seemed to pause. "Why him?" someone near Kale asked, loud enough for the line of spare hands to hear. A laugh scattered like loose screws. Serenia had not spoken yet. She walked among the crews, eyes touching faces like a quiet inspection. When she stopped before Kale, the air was full of expectation, and he felt the weight of every gaze like a sudden pressure. "You are Kale, son of Aaron?" she asked simply. "Yes, your highness." His voice sounded smaller than he felt. He was used to being called by job code and shift number. A princely title felt alien, bright as a sealed circuit. She did not ask about his military record or his score at the academy. She asked things an engineer could answer. How do you fix a fused coupling when you cannot reach the junction? How do you patch a hull breach mid-orbit without a full repair kit? Her questions were short and practical, and Kale felt his answers come out like practiced. Tools direct, honest. Around them, the other officers muttered. Specialists who had spent their lives in war training could not believe a low-ranking engineer was being considered for a mission that, by all measures, wanted only the fastest and strongest. Kale could feel the eyes that measured him against metals he did not possess. He felt the hunger of 100 possibilities of failure. Serenia listened. She did not smile. "You think in improvised solutions," she said finally. "You notice what others consider noise." Kale did not understand the weight of that statement until later. For now, he only felt pride like a small flame. It was pride dampened by a hard cold at the back of his neck, the cold of responsibility. When the Admiralty's protocol officer read the roster and confirmed Kale's assignment, someone shouted, incredulous. A woman officer stepped forward, hands on her hips. "We have trained commandos for infiltration. He has never served in a strike team." Serenia turned, and the small sound everyone knew as her laugh did not come. Instead, she looked at the officer with an unwavering calm. "You trained commandos for what the simulation said would happen," she said. Simulations are not the only way to win. Bring me your best plans. I will weigh them against the impossible. Her eyes returned to Kale. You can refuse, she added, in a tone that left no room for theatrics, only choice. But I ask you to trust this. Sometimes the only way through the impossible is sideways. Kale remembered later that his hands were trembling. He wanted to decline. He wanted to crawl back into the gray, into the comforting certainty of engines that obeyed and screws that fit. But beneath his fear was a different feeling, a low and steady ember. Someone believed in him in a way his supervisors never did. No one had ever considered him more than a utility until now. That shook him like a stone into still water, and the ripple of what he might do started to widen. He accepted. Training was brutal but honest, like anything an engineer would respect. They taught him to move quietly, to listen in ways he had never practiced. They taught him to steal the sound of his breath and hide it beneath the hum of a ship. They gave him weapons he had read about in manuals but never held, and they placed him under instructors who assumed he would make mistakes. Kale made mistakes. He learned faster than most because when something broke he did not panic. He cataloged the failure, asked the right question, and improvised. That was his advantage. Between drills, there were moments when he could watch Serenia work through strategy with the commanders. She spoke rarely, always with a steady logic that drew out alternatives others had not seen. She would direct a maneuver a commander thought reckless, then explain in a single sentence why the risk was calculated. Where others saw only lines on a holo, she seemed to see how a person might imagine those lines and then change their mind. Kale watched her often, trying to understand where she found such certainty. It felt to him like faith. People forget what faith is, she once told him when he was carrying a toolbox beside her as she inspected a map. It is not magic. It is knowledge applied to a person, not an idea. When you believe people can do more than their records say, you force them to try. He thought about his father, Aaron, who had been a mechanic that never left the shadow decks. Aaron had spoken in small sentences about pride in a well-made part, and had taught Kale to love the smell of a recovered circuit. If his father had lived longer, Kale thought he would have recognized this moment as what it was, a choice. To make something of oneself or fold into the place one had been given. The night before they launched, Kale could not sleep. He walked the ship's service corridors and let the sounds of the fleet be his lullaby. Around him, other faces wore clenched expressions, veterans who had seen too much, fresh recruits who tried to appear steady. He passed a maintenance bay where a child peered at a holo of the alien ship, eyes wide. She did not know the fear of the few yet. She only saw the strange geometry and the story of a battle as broken lines. When the transport lowered from the human cruiser toward the rendezvous point, there was a quiet he had not expected. Down at the docking ring, the small team assembled, hand-picked specialists, a few Marines, and Kale as the outsider among them. Names were said, equipment checked, and last-minute instructions given in clipped tones. No one treated him differently now. Efficiency erased the memory of incredulous looks from the hangar, and the mission swallowed them all in a single, practical breath. Serenia watched them go from a command window high above. She gave no speech. She did not need to. In the final hush, she pressed a small palm against the glass and lingered there, as if memorizing something she could not take with her. Kale had the odd thought that perhaps she was not trying to change the world so much as catalog human resolve, like counting living things before a storm. They traveled in a craft designed for stealth. The engines were quiet, and the outer hull was painted in patterns meant to scatter the sensors of an enemy that saw by shapes and vibrations. Kale had never felt fear like the kind that arrived as a physical thing, his stomach tight, his palms slick, his thoughts churning in a way that even wiring diagrams could not untangle. The mission parameters were simple: infiltrate an enemy scout ship, gather intelligence on weapon systems, and if possible, sabotage the ship without drawing the full force of the Vrylock fleet. When the scouts sat in their view, it was more terrible than the hollows suggested. It hung in space like a black shard with a sheen that swallowed light. The crew fell silent. Even the most seasoned Marines exchanged small, uncertain looks. The alien geometry had a way of making human instruments protest. Cale felt a surge of practical calm then. Panic is useful for a moment, an alert to the body, but engineers know there is work to do after the alert. He ran through possibilities in his head. If the hull had resonant properties, they could use that to mask their approach. If the weapon systems drew on a specific energy lattice, they might create a short that would hold long enough for extraction. He thought not of heroics but of leverage, the human advantage of seeing a problem other people judged impossible and finding the angle they had not tried. They boarded. The entry was colder than the human vessels. The air smelled faintly of a mineral the engineers had never found on human worlds, and the corridors were not right. Angles seemed to shift with a lazy defiance, and the lights, when they pulsed, made shadows that moved like animals. They moved slow, measured, alert. Cale felt his hands find the familiar, a loose conduit here, a panel that buzzed with a frequency his diagnostics could catch. He listened as an old friend listens to a heart, feeling through wires and the hum of alien circuits. He began to understand why Serenia had chosen him. The first warning came as a sudden change in the hum of the corridor. It was a small thing that others might have missed, a micro-variation in the ship's background energy. Cale's training flagged it immediately. He crouched, putting fingers to a shared rail, and told the team to hold. The lead Marine cursed softly, but they obeyed. Cale could feel the sound before his instruments confirmed it, something moving below the deck, a shape of motion not made by human hands. They had expected defenses, automated sentries, perhaps a patrol. They had not expected the ship to be alive in the way it was. It was not a creature, exactly, but an architecture that curved and responded like muscle. A corridor that had been straight breathed inward. The floor tilted the wrong way. For a suspended, terrible second, Cale felt the ground under his boots become an untrustworthy surface. A noise rose, not loud but precise, a string plucked by a giant hand. The team snapped into action on instinct. Commands were given in a soft, efficient code. Cale worked with them, rerouting a sensor to latch onto an energy spike, sealing a pressure door with a tar-like polymer he carried for emergencies. Each action was small, but together they created a weave of delays and tricks. It was then Cale realized how much they had miscalculated. This vessel was more than a repository of weapons or intelligence. It wove its corridors and systems into a defense of shifting logic. Their presence had set off a cascade of reactions that could, if not controlled, broadcast their location to the entire armada. He thought of the planet behind them, how fragile the people were who relied on the fleet. He felt for an instant the full cold weight of what failure would mean. "Options," the Marine leader whispered. "We trigger the beacon and we are done." Cale looked at the leader and then at the narrow, uneven corridor ahead. The ship systems were alien, yes, but they obeyed patterns. Where a commander saw a weapon, an engineer saw leverage. He could tamper with the ship's sensor matrix, introduce noise that would mimic a natural cosmic singularity. It would be risky. It would also buy them time. He thought of Serenia's face that day in the hangar, of her calm when she asked about fused couplings. He thought of her words about faith as a practical thing. That faith was now a pressure that pushed him into choosing. "We inject noise into the lattice," he said. "We fake a micro-singularity. It will take a modulation they will treat as a natural event." The leader's jaw tightened. "It could work," he said. "It could also fry our suits." Cale nodded. "I know the risk." They would do it quietly. Cale moved to the nearest console and began to improvise. His fingers were steady, and his mind arranged itself around a chain of simple, mechanical truths. He rewired a feedback loop, diverted energy from a nearby lumen's bank, and fed the modulation into the sensor mesh. The ship shivered as if someone had changed its mind. There was a pause, a long and dangerous breath. Then something shifted inside the alien hull. The hum steadied. The corridor stopped its slow, deadly breathing. A false signature spread through the ship's sensors like an echo searching for a cause and finding none. Cale let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The team moved forward. They gathered data, darting like small, precise hands through the bones of a sleeping giant. For a few precious minutes they were ghosts, taking what human intelligence needed to understand the V-Rylock weapons. But as they found a central node and began the transfer, a tremor went through the corridor. Not a shock, something more deliberate. The ship had registered a foreign presence and had decided to respond. Panels slid and shifted, closing paths and exposing others. The geometry began to fold in on itself, not entirely unlike a closing jaw. Cale felt the air narrow and the lights dimmed further. Instruments flashed warnings. He had seconds to act. He glanced at the data stream spilling into his tablet and saw, with a cold clarity, that they were not alone in understanding the ship. A signature flared on a nearby feed, large, high energy, and moving with intent. Something had awakened that could not be predicted by any simulation. His chest tight with adrenaline, Cale realized the mission had become something else. It was no longer only reconnaissance. The ship was aware, and their presence had become an insult to its logic. The walls themselves arranged a trap. He thought of turning back, of throwing himself into the casual anonymity of the hangar, of the comforting dull work of pipes and bolts. But the image of Serenia's hand against the command glass, the way she had chosen him because she believed he could find a way through, held him like an unseen tether. He had accepted a responsibility he now could not hand off. He braced himself and moved toward the node where the data transfer had begun. The corridor tightened so close his shoulders brushed the walls. The light pulsed like a heartbeat. He could hear the team behind him, breaths sharp, boots light. The alien architecture hummed with an intelligence that did not hate, but did not like being surprised. Cale reached the console and pushed his tools into the port. He worked quickly, not with the calm hand of a practiced soldier, but with the practiced hand of an engineer who had fixed ships in the making and unmade problems by thinking of their smallest parts. He injected a counter-level of noise, a quick sequence of pulses that would make the ship doubt the reality of its hunters. The feed screamed a warning, and then the world lurched. The corridor bucked, and a section of the floor dropped out ahead of them. Dust like fine ash filled the air. The node where they had been looting intelligence erupted into a bloom of alien light. Cale's mind narrowed to the simple fact of movement and survival. He flung himself through the nearest open doorway as sections of the corridor folded and reformed around them like a living trap. His team scrambled, and a Marine caught his elbow, hauling him into a maintenance shaft that smelled of old metal and cold ozone. They were safe for the moment, huddled in the dark, the ship groaning around them. But Cale felt the future open like a blade. He had entered the hull with the belief that he could find leverage. Now the ship itself had become a test he had not expected. He thought of the planet behind them, fragile and waiting, and he thought of Serenia, who had stepped out from her high window and chosen him for a reason he had only begun to understand. As alarms thrummed faintly through the maintenance ducts, Cale pressed his forehead to the cool metal and did not let himself think of the worst things that could happen. Instead, he affirmed the small truths. He knew circuits, he knew improvisation, and he knew to listen. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of someone else's faith on his shoulders, and he did not want to let it fall. They had gone in looking for secrets. They had found a living puzzle and a warning. The rest of the fleet waited. The V-Rylock armada was not patient. Cale smelled fear, yes, but beneath it was a stubborn, human thing, the determination to try the sideways path. He set his jaw and began to work. The ship shifted around them, its walls folding like a strange, living puzzle. Cale's heart pounded as he crawled through the maintenance ducts, careful not to touch anything that might trigger another trap. Behind him, the team followed, silent except for the occasional hiss of breath and the metallic scrape of boots on metal. The alien vessel was alive in ways no human had ever seen, a labyrinth designed not only to protect itself, but to confuse any intruder with impossible angles and constantly changing corridors. Cale held the small data pad in one hand and ran his other hand along the wall. It was not merely a surface. It pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like a dormant nerve. The alien ship seemed to sense them, and Cale realized they were no longer just observing, they were being observed. The hum of the structure intensified in subtle shifts, vibrations that resonated through his chest. He could feel the ship's awareness of their presence, its curiosity as sharp as a blade. "We need to find the core," Cale whispered. "If we can get to the control hub, we can manipulate the systems without being noticed. Otherwise, we're trapped in its corridors until it decides otherwise." The team nodded, eyes wide with tension. The lead Marine, Garrick, looked at him skeptically but trusted the engineer. Cale's unconventional approach had already saved them once. Now it needed to work again. Every step forward was measured. They avoided exposed panels and floors that vibrated with unnatural energy. Cale's mind raced, running through every scenario. He thought of the ship as a machine, despite its alien nature, and tried to identify points where human logic could find leverage. They reached a junction where the corridor split into three paths. Each one seemed to shift imperceptibly, bending reality as if the walls themselves were testing their perception. Cale knelt and studied the patterns of light and shadow, recognizing the subtle timing of the ship's responses. "Left," he said finally, pointing to the path where the vibrations were least synchronized. "It's a gamble, but it gives us a direct route to the main hub." As they moved, the walls seemed to pulse more strongly, almost like a warning. Cale ignored the chill crawling up his spine. He had survived worse in the engine bays and maintenance shafts, but nothing had felt like this before. Here, the rules were alien, and mistakes could mean instant death. Every decision required focus, creativity, and courage, the kind he had never been asked to use before this mission. The air grew warmer as they advanced, and faint, rhythmic vibrations thrummed through the floor. Cale realized they were approaching the energy core. The ship's power signature was immense, unlike anything human engineers had ever encountered. The walls themselves seemed to radiate energy, and the team instinctively slowed, aware that the slightest misstep could trigger a catastrophic reaction. Cale reached a corner and held up a hand. He studied the panel ahead, trying to discern how to access the control hub without triggering the ship's defenses. The alien interfaces were complex but not unintelligible. Patterns repeated, signals overlapped, and he could exploit those to create a temporary blind spot. It required precise timing and steady hands, but Cale was confident. He had no choice. Hesitation could cost them all their lives. "Cover me," he whispered. The team formed a semicircle around the access point, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow and vibration. Cale set his tools to work, inserting a microprobe into the console. The alien interface resisted at first, rejecting his attempts to interface, but Cale persisted. Slowly, the console began to yield, lights flickering as he introduced a pattern of human-coded noise to mask their presence. A hiss of recognition escaped him as the system accepted the probe. He had managed it, just barely. The ship would not detect them for a few precious minutes. Cale exhaled quietly. "We're in. Move fast." The data transfer began, and Cale's mind raced. They needed to gather intelligence on weapon systems, troop movements, and weak points. Each file he copied felt like a lifeline thrown to humanity, a way to tilt the odds in their favor. As he worked, He noticed subtle changes in the corridors, shifts in alignment, vibrations that now felt like curiosity rather than aggression. The ship was aware of the probe but could not interpret it fully. They had bought themselves a window, but it was narrow and temporary. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the probe. Kale frowned. Something had changed. The alien ship's internal energy signature spiked in an irregular pattern. He realized immediately that a patrol was near, moving faster than their sensors had predicted. Garrick, left flank ready. Everyone else, stay low. The corridor ahead split again, but this time the walls themselves seemed to pulse in anticipation. Kale made a snap decision, guiding the team through a narrow maintenance shaft he had noticed earlier. It was tight, barely wide enough for a person, but it would keep them out of the patrol's path. They crawled, scraping and breathing heavily, aware that the ship's awareness was growing with every passing second. Kale's mind worked faster than ever, calculating timing, structural shifts, and energy patterns. The ship's corridors were no longer neutral, they were active participants, reacting to their presence, testing their ingenuity. He found himself adapting in real time, creating diversions and small delays to confuse the sensors. He realized that this was what Sarenia had seen in him, a mind that thrived under pressure, a human ability to improvise where machines had rigid protocols. The patrol passed without detecting them, and Kale allowed himself a brief, silent nod to the team. They were alive, and more importantly, they were moving forward. Every step into the heart of the alien vessel was a victory, a small assertion of human will against an intelligence that seemed designed to dominate. As they approached the core chamber, the heat intensified, and the air smelled faintly of energy discharge. The walls radiated a soft, almost hypnotic glow, making it difficult to focus. Kale paused, studying the entryway. The core was not just a power source, it was a central node controlling the entire vessel. To manipulate it safely, they would need to understand its architecture without triggering a defensive response. He knelt by a side panel, running his fingers over the alien circuits. Patterns emerged, repeating sequences that indicated control protocols. Kale recognized them as a series of logical loops, not unlike human-coded algorithms but more complex and adaptive. He whispered instructions to the team, guiding them as they positioned themselves for the next phase of the mission. The first attempt to access the core was met with resistance. Energy arcs flashed along the panels, and Kale felt the heat lick his hands through the gloves. He recalibrated the probe, adjusting frequencies and timing. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he persisted. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one weighted with the potential for disaster. Finally, the probe interfaced successfully. Kale exhaled, relief and tension mixing in a sharp spike of adrenaline. They were inside the core system, able to manipulate controls and access critical data. He began the transfer, copying schematics, weapon blueprints, and troop movement logs. Each file brought humanity closer to understanding the Vriloc's capabilities and closer to survival. But the ship was not passive. Its corridors shuddered, and the ambient hum shifted into a low, resonant tone. Kale realized that the alien vessel was learning, adapting to their interference. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with intention, redirecting energy flows and creating new obstacles. They had not gone unnoticed for long. "Move faster," Garrick urged, his voice tight with urgency. Kale nodded, working quickly to complete the data transfer. He had prepared for delays, but the adaptive nature of the ship was testing every contingency he had imagined. He focused, isolating sequences and introducing counterloops to mask their activity. Just as the last file began to copy, a loud, resonant pulse shot through the corridor. The ship had detected an anomaly and was attempting to isolate them. Panels shifted, floors tilted, and the path forward threatened to collapse. Kale reacted instinctively, guiding the team through a side conduit that opened just in time. They emerged into a larger chamber, the core pulsating at the center. Energy radiated in waves, creating heat and a subtle vibration that made every step precarious. Kale studied the controls, recognizing that the core could be manipulated to create a temporary blind spot in the ship's sensors. It was risky, but it would allow them to escape undetected. He initiated the sequence, hands moving with precision, adjusting the energy flows and synchronizing with the probe. The ship shuddered, and for a moment it seemed as though it would retaliate violently. Then the hum stabilized and a corridor opened ahead, leading them toward the exit. Kale allowed himself a brief smile. They had survived the core. They had adapted to the ship's intelligence and found a way through impossible odds, but the mission was not over. The Vrylox armada loomed in space, and their journey back would be just as perilous. As they moved toward the exit, Kale felt a surge of determination. The faith Sarenia had placed in him was not misplaced. Human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and courage had brought them this far. The next challenge would test them further, but he was ready. They had entered the heart of an alien vessel, faced an intelligence that seemed to think in ways humans could not, and survived. That was proof enough that humanity could endure and even triumph against overwhelming odds. Kale glanced at his team, their faces tense but resolute. They were alive, they were moving forward, and they carried with them the knowledge that could turn the tide. The alien ship was a puzzle, a challenge, and for now it had been bested by human will. As they approached the transport bay, Kale's mind raced with possibilities. The data they carried could save worlds, guide fleets, and provide humanity with a chance against the Vrylox. Every decision, every improvisation, every calculated risk had brought them here. He knew the journey ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew that they were not merely surviving. They were asserting humanity's presence in a universe that often seemed indifferent. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the spark of possibility. The mission was far from over, but they had already achieved what many thought impossible. Human ingenuity had met alien intelligence and held its ground. And for the first time, Kale truly understood what it meant to be chosen, to be trusted, and to rise to the challenge. The transport doors opened, and the team prepared to leave the alien vessel behind. Kale took one last look at the labyrinthine corridors, the pulsing walls, and the core that had almost been their undoing. He knew that the Vrylox were clever, relentless, and far from defeated, but he also knew that humanity had something no alien intelligence could replicate: adaptability, creativity, and the courage to act when the odds seemed impossible. With that thought, Kale stepped into the transport, ready to face the next phase of their mission and carry the knowledge they had fought so hard to secure. The journey back would be perilous, but they were alive and they were human, and that alone was a force to be reckoned with. The transport shuddered as it detached from the alien vessel, its engines humming a low, steady note that contrasted sharply with the chaos they had just left behind. Kale leaned against the cool metal wall, trying to steady his breathing. He could feel the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins, a reminder that every step inside that ship had been a dance on the edge of disaster. The data they had gathered was priceless, and the success of their mission now depended on returning it safely to the fleet. Garrick, standing near the control panel, wiped sweat from his brow. "That was too close," he muttered, "too close for comfort." Kale nodded but did not respond immediately. His mind was already running through the next stage, navigating back through territory watched by the Vrylox, ensuring their presence remained undetected, and protecting the sensitive information that could save millions. Each calculation was fraught with risk, yet he felt a strange confidence. They had faced the alien ship's intelligence and survived. That experience had sharpened him, and he knew that thinking creatively and remaining calm under pressure was their greatest advantage. The transport shuddered again as it entered a stealth corridor, a lane in space designed to minimize detection by enemy sensors. The walls of the corridor were dotted with panels that absorbed and scattered energy signatures. Kale observed the displays intently, noting that even minor deviations in speed or trajectory could betray their presence. He adjusted the course with careful precision, ensuring that the hum of the engines remained within safe parameters. "You're calm," Garrick said after a moment, glancing at him. "I expected you to be shaking after that hull." Kale allowed a small smile. "Fear is useful," he said quietly. "It alerts you, but panic kills. We survived because we observed, adapted, and acted. Nothing more, nothing less." The team moved in tense silence, the only sound the occasional beep from the instruments tracking their position. Kale's eyes flicked constantly over the readings, scanning for anomalies, any sign of the viewership that might indicate they had been detected. The memory of the alien vessel's living corridors haunted him, how the ship had seemed to watch, to anticipate their every move. He shivered slightly, realizing that the armada awaiting them might be far more perceptive than human technology had accounted for. Hours passed in this tense vigilance, the journey marked by careful adjustments and quiet observation. Then, faint on the edge of the sensor readings, a ripple appeared, something that did not belong. Kale leaned closer to the display. A patrol vessel, a viewership scout moving in an unusual pattern, almost like it was deliberately searching for disturbances in the stealth corridor. "Contact," Garrick whispered, stiffening. "They're moving fast. If they see us, we're done for." Kale's mind raced. They could not outrun a viewership ship in open space. Their engines were not powerful enough, and the alien vessels were known for speed and adaptability. But Kale had learned that thinking differently could create opportunities others overlooked. He studied the patrol's trajectory, noting slight inconsistencies in its movement. It seemed to scan in predictable patterns, almost as if its sensors had blind spots. "Prepare to maneuver," he said. "We'll use their pattern against them. When they scan left, we shift right. Keep speed steady and engines silent and follow my lead." The team adjusted immediately, trusting Kale's judgment. They weaved through the corridor, timing each movement with care. For a moment, it seemed the patrol might notice them, but then, with precise timing, the scout passed by without raising alarm. The transport shuddered slightly, and Garrick let out a breath he had been holding. "That was perfect," Garrick said. "How did you see that?" Kale shrugged. "Observation, pattern recognition. That's all we had inside the alien ship too. The same principle applies here. Watch carefully, move strategically, and think 2 steps ahead." The patrol gone, Kale allowed himself a brief moment of relief. But he knew the journey was far from over. They still needed to navigate multiple sectors patrolled by enemy vessels, each one a potential threat. And more than that, they carried information the viewership could not allow to escape, knowledge that would make them a prime target if discovered. As they traveled, Kale began to examine the data they had gathered. Schematics of weapon systems, troop movements, energy signatures, and strategic layouts filled the displays. He realized the value of what they had taken. Humanity could now anticipate attacks, design countermeasures, and exploit weaknesses that were previously invisible. Every moment of careful extraction had been worth it. But even as he studied, Kale sensed the tension in the transport. The crew was skilled, but they were not used to thinking in the constant, shifting patterns required to evade alien pursuit. He began to give small instructions, teaching them to read the sensors as he did, to anticipate and adjust rather than react blindly. He felt a subtle satisfaction in seeing their understanding grow, knowing that each person's ingenuity was now a part of their survival. Hours turned into a tense rhythm of observation and adjustment. The team moved as a single unit, responding to Kale's guidance. The patrols were frequent, but with careful timing and adaptive thinking, they avoided confrontation. Kale's mind was a constant flow of calculations, improvisations, and contingencies. He thought of Sarania's words about faith, her belief in his ability to solve problems others deemed impossible. That faith had pushed him to act boldly inside the alien vessel, and now it guided him through the silent corridors of space. Suddenly, a sharp alert sounded on the navigation panel. Kale's eyes widened. A Vrylock cruiser had detected a faint signature in the sector ahead, moving toward their location with alarming speed. It was larger and far more dangerous than any patrol vessel, equipped with weaponry capable of destroying their transport in seconds. "They've picked up a trace," Garrick said, voice tight. "We need to move fast." Kale's mind raced. There was no room for error. The cruiser's trajectory suggested it was homing in on the faint energy residue left by the probe they had inserted into the alien vessel. If they continued on their current path, they would be intercepted. He studied the sensors, looking for a solution. There was a narrow energy corridor nearby, a natural formation of asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies that could provide cover. It was risky. Moving through the corridor would require precise maneuvering, and any miscalculation could result in collision or exposure. But it was their only chance. "Take the corridor," Kale ordered. "Trust the calculations. Follow my lead and keep adjustments precise. One mistake and we're done for." The transport veered toward the corridor, engines humming carefully to avoid detection. The team worked in tense coordination, adjusting thrusters, monitoring energy signatures, and following Kale's instructions. The cruiser behind them accelerated, closing the distance faster than anticipated. Kale felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. He had faced impossible odds before, inside the alien vessel, but this was different. Here they were exposed in the vastness of space, with nothing but wits, timing, and precision to protect them. He focused on the patterns, the energy flows, and the rhythms of the corridor. Every maneuver was calculated, every adjustment deliberate. The transport slipped into the corridor, weaving between massive rocks and gravitational eddies. The cruiser followed, attempting to track them through the chaotic formation. Kale's calculations proved correct. The Vrylock sensors were disrupted by the natural anomalies, and the cruiser began to lose precision in its targeting. "Keep steady," Kale whispered, though the team could hear him clearly. "We're almost through." The corridor narrowed, and Kale guided the transport with meticulous care. Rocks loomed on either side, and energy spikes from gravitational distortions caused the instruments to flicker. The tension was unbearable, but Kale's steady hand and clear instructions kept the team focused. Finally, they emerged from the corridor into open space, the cruiser struggling to recalibrate its sensors. The transport accelerated, engines humming at safe but optimal levels. The immediate threat was behind them, but Kale knew that more challenges awaited. The Vrylocks were relentless, and this victory, though crucial, was temporary. He allowed himself a brief glance at the team. Faces were tense but relieved. Garrick gave a small nod of respect. Kale felt a quiet pride, not in himself alone, but in their collective ability to adapt, think, and survive. Human ingenuity had once again triumphed over an overwhelming adversary, and the lesson was clear. Courage and cleverness could defy even the most daunting odds. The journey continued, each moment a careful balance of observation, calculation, and trust. Kale felt the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of possibility. They were carrying knowledge that could change the course of battles, save lives, and demonstrate that humanity was not easily subdued. As the transport approached the coordinates for rendezvous with the fleet, Kale allowed himself a small smile. They had survived the alien vessel, outmaneuvered patrols, and escaped a deadly cruiser. Each challenge had tested their skills, their courage, and their ability to think creatively under pressure. He thought of Sarania, her quiet faith in his abilities, and realized that her belief had not been misplaced. It had been a spark that ignited human ingenuity in the face of impossible odds. That spark had guided them through the alien ship and the perils of space, and it would continue to guide them in the battles to come. The fleet's signal appeared on the display, a welcome sight that marked the end of the first leg of their journey. Kale prepared to transmit the gathered intelligence, knowing that what they carried could tip the scales in humanity's favor. The mission was far from over, but they had proven that with ingenuity, courage, and teamwork, the impossible could be overcome. As they moved toward the rendezvous point, Kale reflected on the lessons of the day. Observation mattered, adaptation was essential, and trust, in both human and team, was a powerful force. The Vrylocs were formidable, but humanity's greatest weapon was its ability to think, create, and act when others saw only obstacles. With that thought, Kale set his mind to the task ahead. The next challenge would test them further, but they were ready. The transport hummed steadily through space, carrying with it not only data, but the proof that human ingenuity could survive and thrive against impossible odds. The transport slipped through the last sector of the stealth corridor and emerged into the wide expanse of open space. The fleet's rendezvous point just ahead. Kale's hands were steady on the console, but his mind raced with calculations, contingency plans, and the subtle hum of tension that never left a person who had faced the alien vessel. The data they carried was priceless: blueprints, weapon systems, and intelligence that could save countless lives, but the Vrylocs were relentless. Kale knew the mission wasn't over. Danger still prowled in the darkness of space, and the fleet was vulnerable until they delivered the information safely. Garrick checked the external sensors repeatedly, his jaw tight. "No sign of immediate pursuit," he said, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. "But the Armada is out there. We're not safe until we're docked." Kale nodded, scanning the readings. The alien ship had been a complex puzzle, but now they faced a different challenge: a fleet that could swarm, outmaneuver, and overwhelm if they made a single mistake. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, a constant reminder of why Sarenia had chosen him. He had been underestimated his whole life, but here, he was the key to survival, and failure was not an option. The transport accelerated, carefully maintaining stealth protocols while preparing for docking with the fleet. Kale's mind remained active, analyzing every possibility. He considered the path of each ship in the rendezvous zone, the energy signatures of approaching vessels, and the likelihood of Vryloc scouts nearby. Even in moments of calm, he knew to anticipate the unpredictable. Suddenly, a warning tone sounded across the console. Kale's eyes narrowed as the sensors displayed an unusual signature: a massive Vryloc battleship moving with precision toward the fleet. Its speed and trajectory indicated it was aware of human movements in the sector and intended to strike before reinforcements could respond. "They're coming," Garrick said, voice low. "If they reach the fleet first," Kale cut him off. "We have one chance," he said. "We can't fight them head-on, but we can force them to overextend. Use the data we collected to manipulate the fleet's defenses and create a diversion. Then we escape and deliver the information." The team worked quickly, following Kale's instructions. He used the information they had extracted from the alien vessel to anticipate the battleship's weapon systems and likely attack patterns. With careful planning, they could trigger a series of decoys and energy pulses that would confuse the Vrylocs long enough for the fleet to reposition and prepare for defense. As Kale manipulated the control systems, his fingers moved with practiced precision. Every calculation mattered. A single misstep could expose the transport and doom the fleet. He adjusted energy flows, redirected auxiliary power to critical nodes, and synchronized the pulses with the fleet's shield generators. The vessel responded, sensors shifting as the simulated threats created an illusion of false targets. The Vryloc battleship slowed, its weapon systems scanning but misidentifying the fleet's positions. Kale allowed himself a brief, sharp inhale of relief, but he knew the danger wasn't gone. The alien ship's intelligence had already adapted once, and it could adapt again. Every move had to be calculated, every action precise. "Kale, incoming contact," Garrick shouted, pointing at the display. Several smaller V-Rylock interceptors were converging on their position, likely drawn by residual energy from their previous maneuvers. Kale's mind worked frantically. They could not outrun the interceptors, and engagement would be disastrous. He scanned the coordinates, looking for terrain to exploit. The fleet had deployed several artificial gravity fields and asteroid clusters nearby, a chance to use the environment as a shield. "Hold steady," Kale ordered. "We'll lead them into the field. Follow my path exactly. No deviations." The transport veered into the asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks and gravitational anomalies. The interceptors pursued, their weapons systems firing intermittently but with limited effectiveness due to the chaotic environment. Kale guided the team with sharp, precise commands, keeping engines just quiet enough to avoid detection while maintaining control. The interceptors collided with asteroids or misfired as Kale anticipated their movements. One by one, they were neutralized or forced to retreat, unable to navigate the complex terrain as effectively as the human transport. The team moved as a single unit, synchronized under Kale's calm, calculated direction. Once clear of the field, Kale focused on the next phase, delivering the data to the fleet without attracting additional V-Rylock attention. He established a secure transmission link, ensuring that encryption protocols were flawless. The data began uploading, and Kale monitored the process closely, aware that a single disruption could corrupt the entire cache. The fleet's response was immediate. Commanders accessed the intelligence, adjusting ship positions, weapon deployments, and defensive strategies. Kale felt a surge of satisfaction as he saw human ingenuity applied on a massive scale, using knowledge gained through courage, observation, and quick thinking. Humanity was fighting back, not with brute force alone, but with strategy and cleverness that matched the alien threat. But then the console flashed again, a new threat emerging. A V-Rylock strike cruiser had broken through a distant sector and was now approaching the fleet at high speed. Kale's heart quickened. Time was critical. The transmission was not yet complete. He took a deep breath, recalling everything he had learned from the alien vessel: improvisation, pattern recognition, and exploiting enemy assumptions. "We'll create another diversion," he said to the team. "We'll draw them away from the fleet long enough to finish the upload. Everyone, follow my instructions exactly. This is our last chance." Kale manipulated the transport systems, generating energy pulses that mimicked multiple ships moving in different directions. He synchronized them with the fleet's sensor arrays, creating the illusion of decoy movements. The strike cruiser, perceiving the false signals, altered its course, chasing phantom targets instead of the actual transport. The team held their breath as the cruiser accelerated toward the decoys. The tension in the transport was palpable. Kale monitored every second, ensuring that the pulses remained convincing and the transport's real location remained hidden. Slowly, the cruiser veered further away, its targeting systems misled, giving Kale the precious moments needed. "Upload at 80%, Kale whispered, eyes fixed on the progress bar. "Almost there," the final files transferred. Kale confirmed receipt with the fleet command, relief flooding through him. The knowledge was safe, and humanity now had the information needed to defend against the V-Rylocks effectively. He allowed himself a brief, exhausted smile. They had completed the mission, against impossible odds with ingenuity, courage, and teamwork. But Kale knew they were not yet safe. The V-Rylocks were still out there, and the fleet would face more challenges in the days ahead. He needed to guide the transport back to a secure docking bay, navigating remaining threats while keeping the ship and team intact. The journey was tense but steady. Kale continued to monitor sensors, adjust trajectories, and anticipate enemy movements. His mind was sharp, his focus unwavering, as he guided the transport through sectors marked by gravitational anomalies, debris fields, and potential ambush points. Each decision was precise, each maneuver calculated to maximize safety and efficiency. As they approached the docking bay, Kale finally allowed himself a moment to reflect. They had survived an alien vessel that seemed alive, outmaneuvered patrols and a strike cruiser, and delivered intelligence that could change the course of human survival. Every risk had been calculated, every action deliberate, and every choice had depended on trust in himself, in his team, and in the belief that humans could overcome challenges that seemed impossible. The docking sequence began, and Kale guided the transport with steady hands. The bay doors opened, welcoming them home. Crew members cheered quietly, recognizing the courage, skill, and ingenuity that had brought the team back intact. Garrett clasped Kale's shoulder, nodding in respect. Serenia was there to meet them, standing tall and composed. Her eyes met Kale's, and he felt the weight of her quiet faith in him. "You did it," she said simply, her tone carrying pride and acknowledgement. "You believed in what others overlooked, and it made all the difference." Kale felt a warmth rise in his chest. For so long, he had been underestimated, dismissed as an engineer who could fix machines but could not lead or act decisively. Now, he understood the true power of human potential, the ability to observe, adapt, and act when others saw only impossible odds. The fleet celebrated quietly, aware that the victory was both tactical and symbolic. Humanity had faced an alien intelligence that seemed unbeatable and had triumphed through ingenuity, courage, and cooperation. Kale walked through the docking bay, watching crew members access the intelligence he had helped secure, knowing that the knowledge they carried would save lives, guide strategies, and prove that humans could endure. He glanced at Serenia again, her calm presence a reminder that belief could inspire action beyond expectation. Her faith had given him the courage to step forward, to act creatively under pressure, and to survive where others might have failed. That faith had been the spark that allowed human ingenuity to shine. Kale's thoughts returned to the alien vessel, the patrols, the strike cruiser, and every narrow escape. Each challenge had been daunting, each moment testing his ability to think, adapt, and lead. And yet humanity had prevailed, not through strength alone, but through intelligence, determination, and the courage to act when others hesitated. The mission complete, Kale allowed himself a rare moment of rest. He stood in the docking bay, looking out at the stars, feeling the hum of human life and ingenuity around him. He had survived impossible odds, not because of weapons or luck, but because of the human spirit, the capacity to observe, innovate, and persevere. Serenia joined him quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You were chosen for a reason," she said softly. "Not because you were the strongest or the fastest, but because you could see solutions where others saw only obstacles." Kale nodded, understanding fully now. Human ingenuity, courage, and determination had carried them through the darkest challenges. They had survived, and in doing so, had proven that humanity could rise above any obstacle, even the most formidable alien threat. The fleet prepared for the next phase of its mission, strengthened by the knowledge and intelligence Kale had delivered. And as he stood there, he felt a quiet confidence. Humanity had faced the impossible, adapted, and triumphed. And as long as they believed in themselves and in one another, they could continue to survive, to innovate, and to overcome. For Kale, it was more than survival. It was proof that human potential, combined with courage and trust, could achieve what others thought impossible. And that belief, once sparked, could light the way through the darkest challenges. He stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next, carrying not only the intelligence that would save lives, but also the quiet certainty that humans, when united in purpose and ingenuity, could overcome even the greatest threats the universe could throw at them. He survived impossible odds because the princess believed in him.